You got to operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to preview the Tennessee game, the trip to Knoxville that has been circled on a lot of people's calendars since before the season, and perhaps the Gators' toughest test outside of Utah in the first 6 games of the season. Obviously, the Tennessee game is a rivalry game, and as such, it does hold a special place in some of our hearts, especially those of us growing up in the 90s when this was a back and forth rivalry, when this featured multiple top 10 matchups. It's kind of gone by the wayside and kind of gone by the way of what Georgia was to most of us 90s kids, where growing up in the 90s, for 14 years, we only lost to Georgia once. With Tennessee right now, we've only lost to them once since 2005. A little bit weird to think of it that way, but that is what it is. This game will have a big time game feel. You have College Game Day coming to town. You have Late Kick Josh bringing Pate State into Knoxville. You have all sorts of other things going on. They're going to Checkerboard Neyland Stadium. All sorts of Tennessee big games. They smell blood in the water. It kind of reminds me a bit of the 2016 game, which is also the last time that Game Day went to Knoxville for a Florida-Tennessee matchup. Needless to say, this is not going to have some of the, so-so vibes that some of the last few Florida-Tennessee games have had. And one thing I do have to say, and I know some people may find this controversial, but Rocky Top does, in a certain way, hold a special place in my heart. Not that I'm a big fan of the song or a big fan of the Volunteers, but from 1996 to 2011, that is 16 straight seasons with one gap of the 2001 season due to 9/11. Tennessee was the team that would kick off our SEC schedule. Many of those years, we didn't face a great opponent before facing Tennessee. So, yes, the season may have kicked off, against whoever, but the real season didn't really kick off until you started hearing Tennessee coming to town, and hearing that song just says, the season is here for me. Now, with that said, that's just what it makes me think of. Makes me think of big games, makes me think of great moments from the 1995 comeback in the rain where we killed Tennessee in the second half. 1997, Tony George returning the touchdown on the INT. 99, Alex Brown's breakout game. The reverse to Bubba Caldwell in 2005. Of course, Tim Tebow's breakout party in 2007 or 2009, where we're talking about Lane Kiffin talking a lot of trash. Or even going to 2014, Treon Harris comes in. We're down 9-0 Knoxville, and we end up beating them 10-9. Will Muschamp, I'm happy to see all these people out here disappointed. This is a fun game, and of course, we can go to 2015, 4th and 14. We can do the heave to cleave, 2017. Lots of good history for the Gators here. This is a game I always look forward to. I am excited to talk about it on this episode. Some notes regarding our depth chart. Ventrell Miller is questionable. According to Billy Napier in his Wednesday press conference, he did say Miller would be a game time decision. When asked, he did seem to indicate that it's not an injury that he believes could get worsened with play, but it's a matter of pain management and how much Miller can take. And it's really up to him. It'd be big for him if he was out there for the leadership. And of course, we'll address that a little bit with the defense as we move forward. Just to look at some of the unit rankings, Tennessee has the 51st ranked defense, where we have the 77th ranked defense. They've got the 3rd ranked offense, and we are currently 98th in offense. Some of that can come down to the quality of teams that we've played. Tennessee has played Ball State. They had their second game at Pitt, which, although Pitt is a good program, they're still working out having a lot of turnover, including turnover at quarterback. Granted, Pitt's quarterback is a pretty good one. He did go out with injury in that game. And they also lost Jordan Addison, the Biletnikoff winner for last year. For those that don't know, that's what you give to the top receiver in college football. And they finished up last week by beating Akron. Now, at no point am I saying any of this to say that they're not a good football team. They've gotten much better since we played them last year. Last year when we played them, they were still figuring some things out. They're still getting used to the offense. They weren't even fully sure who their starting quarterback would be. Yes, Hendon Hooker, their quarterback, did start that game against us. However, Joe Milton got time as well. After that, Hooker became the guy and began to evolve in Josh Heupel's system. With that said, we of course have faced two currently top 10 ranked opponents. I don't think Kentucky will finish near the top 10, but for now, they are a top 10 opponent, top 15 opponent. And of course, Utah, last week, we did kind of lay an egg against South Florida, and we still somehow beat the Bulls and came out with a win. That's one thing I can say for this team, whether it's been Utah, USF, and some against Kentucky. When faced with adversity, they tend to step up for the most part. Now, again, there were some Kentucky issues, but that's besides the point. Anyways, first, let's take a look at the Florida offense against the Tennessee defense. I know there's a lot of temptation to say we should just run. AR's been struggling. And to a point, I do agree with that mindset. But I do want to point out that currently Tennessee is the 100th ranked pass defense. They're currently giving up about 261.3 yards per game. If there was a defensive backfield where maybe AR could come out of his slump, this may be it. With that said, again, that is also a question of what AR we're going to see. Are we going to see the AR that played against Utah and did decently well in the first half against USF? Or are we going to see the Kentucky AR and the second half against USF AR? Tennessee's defense is 19th against the run at 83.3 yards per game. Some of that may be they face not great teams and also teams that focus on passing. Another thing could be with the big leads they had against Ball State and Akron. If you're down by a lot, you're not going to run as much, so that's also going to limit your running game. Again, not to say that they don't have talent on that defensive line, not to say they don't have good linebackers, but when other teams are in positions where you have to pass, it will limit your running game just a little bit. Doesn't mean they can't be top 25 or top 50 run defense, but I do think the leads that they've had in some of these games does impact quite a bit. For example, I watched a little bit of the Pitt game this week. Early on in the game, they gave a massive running touchdown on a read option. That is something I want to see more of out of this team. I do want to see that read option, and I do want to see AR, even if he's not keeping it, sell the fake, because even if a linebacker takes a step the wrong way because they think he kept it, well, then that's another step they have to go back just to be even, and that could leave a crease for the running back and give a little bit of time for a lineman to get downfield to block that linebacker. With all this said, the first thing I would do, and this is what everyone's saying to do, is establish the run. That is the strongest part of our game. We have probably the best offensive line that we have had in years. I can't even tell you how many years because our offensive line has had mixed results for so long, where this offensive line seems to be able to make their blocks. If they can make their blocks and establish a run game, that'll open up the play action pass game. That may also open up a few more things for the offense. The second thing I'd do after establishing the run is I would scheme easy throws for Anthony Richardson. What I mean by that is see some of the levels plays that we saw against Utah that he was so successful with. I would also run things like crossing routes and slants, just various things that can that are easy throws that can get them into a rhythm, and also back off some of the linebackers and create some of that running room. Another thing I would do is while doing all this, I would use the wide side of the field. As I talked about in the last episode, a lot of our outside runs, passes, whatever, seem to be going to the short side of the field. And even though sometimes personnel may be an issue, another issue is if you're using the short side of the field, you bring in the 12th defender of the sideline. And also, you're not really getting your guy in space as you would like, because more space means more room to run. And also, things like the linebackers may not be able to get to a guy turning a corner, where if the short sideline is there, it's just that little bit extra help that the linebacker could need to help make a play on that ball. By establishing the run, making easy throws, I'm not even saying make long throws, just making a few short throws help keep the defense honest. It'll help us shorten the game. And shortening the game is important, A, with some of our defensive woes that we've had, and B, with Tennessee's quick strike offense. The less we keep their offense on the field, the better it'll be for our defense. And they can't score if we have the ball. So by shortening the game, which is something we've seen other teams do to us, and it actually happened quite a bit in the Utah game for both teams, by having only a few possessions, it creates pressure. Tennessee has the 11-point favorites. The pressure will be on them to win this game. And the longer, if we can hang around, the more pressure of, oh, here we go again, might be a factor. And with that said, although I want to see us shorten the game, if we do have a big gain, such as a run of 20 yards or more, or if AR hits one of those 20, 30-yard completions, as he hit 3 of them last game against USF, that's the time I would see the tempo that we saw against Utah and really haven't seen since. Do a little bit of Utah and catch Tennessee's defense on their heels. With that said, if you can use that tempo to get Tennessee a little bit off balance on their heels, that may open up for another big run or another big pass. Things just to think about, although I'm not saying let's run a lot of tempo because I would like to shorten the game. I do want to make sure our defense gets rest. However, I do think tempo used smartly could be an advantage for this offense. With all of that said, the keys for this offense against Tennessee is to establish a run, get Anthony Richardson some easy throws, whether that's on crossing routes, levels, slants, whatever, to help build his confidence. Use the wide side of the field, shorten the game, but although you want to shorten the game, using the tempo we saw against Utah at times after big games to try and catch Tennessee off guard. Moving on to the Tennessee offense against the UF defense. As I've said, Tennessee has the 3rd ranked offense in the nation. They have the 56th ranked rushing attack that is good for 182 yards per game. Of course, against USF, we couldn't stop their running game, so that is a major concern. One thing that may boost us up is if Ventrell Miller is able to play. Even if he's not 100%, one thing that he does well is get everybody lined up in the correct position. Just that quarterbacking on the defense is something that we really missed last game. And if Ventrell Miller can play against Tennessee, even for a little while, it will help get this defense a little bit of an advantage. One thing I'd never really thought about, though, until it's been brought up by a few people this week, is without the crowd noise of the swamp, it should allow our defense to communicate with each other a little bit better, as Neyland Stadium will not be trying to get loud while the other team has the ball. So maybe that helps out our defense. I don't know, but that is just one thing to look at. Tennessee does have one of the top passing games. It's 5th in the nation with 371 yards per game. Meanwhile, our defense is 26th in passing at 178 yards per game. Some of that, again, comes down to USF didn't have to pass on us too much. Kentucky had a lead, so at the end, they were just running the ball, trying to kill clock and get a field goal. But then again, we faced teams like Utah who did have a lot of success throwing against us, especially with their tight ends. The first thing that would be a key for our defense against this Tennessee offense, and this is a little bit where Ventrell Miller does come in, and that is to stop the run. Since we have not been great against the run at times this year, that is definitely a concern. If Tennessee can run on us, it's going to be a long day. If we can stop the run, then we get to lean on the strength of our defense, which is our pass defense, which is not only our really good cornerbacks, but also our pass rush. When you're allowing a guy like Brenton Cox to just run in and hopefully he doesn't over pursue. He's gotten better. If you watch the film, he has gotten better at over pursuing. Still not perfect, but if you allow him to just do his pass rush thing, or a Princely Man or a Tyreek Sapp, those are things that will help us out if we can stop the run. This Tennessee defense or this Tennessee offensive line can be beat by our defensive line, which that is key number 2. Have the defense take over that Tennessee offensive line. The third thing is shut down Tennessee's key receiver, Cedric Tillman. Tillman is being talked about a lot, how we heard before the Kentucky game about Tavion Robinson was going to come in and dominate us. Well, there's lots of fear of Cedric Tillman. Outside of him, Tennessee does have a few decent receivers, but no one quite on his level. And if we can do even a little bit of what we did to Tavion Robinson, who had 1 catch for 0 yards against us in that Kentucky game, if we can do that to Cedric Tillman, that will go a long way in the Gators doing enough on defense for us to have a chance in this game. Another thing that I would say is key is watching out for the tight ends. Tennessee doesn't throw to their tight ends too much, but I bet you Josh Heupel has watched the film. He's seen how we've had struggles covering tight ends at times, and I don't doubt they're going to try something early and often. In fact, going back to the last time Tennessee beat us in 2016, one of the big plays that they had to really get them in the game was completions to their tight ends. 2016, 2 completely different teams, but just a position that runs through my head, just a memory that runs through my head as we're talking about how a lot of things seem to be setting up in a very 2016-like manner for this game. A final key for our defense against Tennessee's offense would be for us to adjust early. In the Kentucky game, we adjusted pretty much right after we gave up the 55-yard touchdown pass. Jalen Kimber, again, decent coverage on that play, but the receiver made a play. Problem was that was still over a quarter into the game. We had already given up 150-ish yards passing to the tight end. Tennessee's got a better offense. If we're slow to those adjustments, they will take advantage. Just to review, for the defense against Tennessee's offense, the keys would be first and foremost to stop the run, and then our D-line needs to take over and show strength against that Tennessee offensive line. We need to try and limit Tillman like we did Tavion Robinson of Kentucky. We also need to do well covering their tight end in the pass game. As we've shown that to be a weakness, I do think Tennessee will at least try to exploit it. Hopefully, we're going to be proactive in trying to shut that Tennessee tight end down early, and also that we make adjustments early if things are not working to something that may work better. Overall, I do try to be an eternal optimist, although I can definitely get pessimistic on things. But in this game, I do think that there is a shot for Florida to win this game, much more than some of Twitter or wherever you get your Gator news and see Gator fans would have you believe. And that's because they see AR's been struggling, don't think he can go back to being the guy we saw lead us to a win against Utah just a few weeks ago. Don't think that the defense can shut a running game down like they did against Kentucky. Don't think, a lot of things could happen. Meanwhile, I'm thinking maybe we can just do enough. I do think our pass defense does set up well against this Tennessee offense. I could be wrong about that. We will see. And also with Tennessee running the ball, if we can shut down that run or slow it down and go to the passing game, I do believe that matchup would favor us. I do think that we should be able to establish the run against them. I think that their pass defense is something that may allow AR to get some of his confidence back. So, in my mind, this game is winnable. I said it before the season began. I also said before the season began that this is one of the games that is circling as a possible loss in our 8-4 floor type schedule as I put out there. But I also said injuries and other things could make a difference. One of those that was unforeseen was AR's regression from Utah to now, and also Ventrell Miller's injury. So those are things I do take into consideration. I am going to be an optimist on this one. I have Florida winning 31-28. I'm using a number based on what we were able to do against a better Utah defense, and also the fact that Tennessee at Pitt could only score 27 points in regulation. Pitt probably has a little bit better, or at least more used to the scheme on their defense, but they definitely don't have the athletes or the defensive line and cornerbacks that we do. That's why I give Tennessee the 28-31. Again, it's about what our offense has done in the past against better defenses, adjusting it for a little bit of struggles. I'm not going to pick against the Gators if I don't have to. I think we could lose this one, but my official pick will be 31 for Florida, 28 for Tennessee. Now I do want to get to a listener question. I wanted to do a few questions, but I do think this is one I really need to focus on for tonight. It is from Liddy_Robert on Twitter. He asked me, could you give your opinion about our offensive scheme? And I'm sure part of this comes from throughout Twitter. There's lots of people asking for a new offensive coordinator and all sorts of just complaining and stuff going on. I understand some of it. I can tell you when we hired Billy Napier, I mean, it's no secret. You can go find it on the internet. I was skeptical about Napier's offense. I'm open about that. However, as I've said before, when getting onto this topic, I don't think we've seen enough yet to make a judgment. We've seen some good things in like the Utah game. We've also seen the last two games. I don't know how much of that is scheme as opposed to how much of that is regression from AR. With that said, when I watch things like Gator Nation Football Podcast YouTube breakdowns and they're pointing out us running out routes or other routes that go straight towards a hitch where basically you're running a route into a defender, that does concern me. But again, I have not seen enough of this offense to really sample size and say, do I like it? Do I not like it? So let me go ahead and say some things I like and some things I don't like so I can give a more complete answer to this. Because again, we've only seen 3 games and we've seen an X factor of a quarterback regressing before our eyes in some ways, in ways that we have never seen before. So first, let me tell you some things I like about this offense. And the first thing is I like that we have a run game. How many times over the last few years have we generally had an inability to run the football? Even with Dameon Pierce, he was a great back, but many times we just were not successful in that run game. Maybe not with him carrying the ball, but just in general, when we had him, not always the best running team. A lot of that coming down to offensive line play, which that would be my second thing I like about this offense is just how more dominant our offensive line is in it with the zone blocking scheme. And those two things put together, I should say it gives us several running backs who are over 5 yards per carry and a third who's at about 4 yards per carry. And so with that, if you like running the ball a lot, this is definitely a good, successful offense for you. And a lot of these guys do have either eligibility remaining, or in the case of Austin Barber, our backup right tackle, who's currently starting due to injury, getting lots of experience to move forward. And also our underclassmen are learning in the system. So by the time they come up, they should be just as good. So I do like that and the running game portion of this offense. And another thing that I like is I have seen a lot of open receivers, and we'll get into some of the other things with the passing game on some of my dislikes. But I can't really say, hey, this offense isn't working when I've seen open receivers and our QB just fail to hit them. There's always going to be an open receiver that a QB doesn't see, whether it's due to escaping the pocket due to pressure or seeing a earlier read in the progression that's open or something. There are times that all QBs miss receivers, and then there are times that they see them and misfire, and that's what we've been seeing a lot in this offense. So that's one thing I can at least say I like is that we've seen open receivers. Now to talk about some things I dislike in this offense. I don't like what I believe to be some personnel misuses. Of course, we're talking about not using your fastest or shiftiest players on things like screens and jet sweeps. In the first game, we saw Dejon Reynolds come in, made a nice play on a jet sweep. Then he drops a screen, and we've not seen him since. A little bit disappointing on that. Maybe he's something we see against Tennessee. I don't know, but that's just one thing I would say for something I do not like with this offense, as well as I'm a very big passing guy, and the lack of just some of the spread concepts of getting your guy in space and the ability of doing that to getting your guy to beat defenders one-on-one and make a play. Instead, we do bunch sets. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I do understand their value at times, but I also am a guy who likes getting a defense spread out and then throwing the ball around. And some of it could be because of the QB issues we've had the last two games. However, when I look at Louisiana's offense, when I look at Napier's time as offensive coordinator at Clemson, none of these times were they an elite passing team. So for that, I am not the biggest fan of the passing side of things, but again, maybe if AR gets back to the guy that we've seen him be in the past, when we've seen him read defenses, when we've seen him be accurate with the ball, when we've seen him hit guys 40 yards down the field while rolling out to his left, squaring his shoulders and just throwing it up and nailing the guy right at the sidelines. If we see that AR, we may see something different from this offense. So that's why I really do not think it's time to hit the panic button. Truth be told, I do believe that there's way too much negativity about this. We're 3 games in. If we are 3 years in, or heck, if it's like this way the entire year, changes aren't made, then yes, I'm going to become vocal in a different way. But as I've seen it, we faced 2 good defenses and, well, USF. And also, we've seen a quarterback regress like we've never really seen before, from a guy who's done really well to, oh my gosh, what is going on? So, with that said, chill out. It's not a good look for us, especially to recruits. If we want to improve, how about let's not have a bunch of recruits saying, oh, they're 3 games in, they're 2-1, and they're ready to fire the coach, or they're ready to tell the coach to not be OC anymore. Again, storylines to watch. Definitely something that's worth mentioning if things don't improve. But let's at least get through the first half of the season first. Because after Tennessee, we have a not so great FCS opponent who hasn't been as good as I thought they'd be in Eastern Washington. And then we follow that up with a bad Mizzou team. Once we get through that, then we've got LSU, and that will be a measuring stick of where we are halfway through the season. With all that said, thank you everyone once again for taking time to listen. Thank you, Robert, for your question. For other questions we got, I will try and answer them on the next episode. I'll be speaking to you later. I am going to be heading up to Tennessee for this game to take it in firsthand, and hopefully we can see the Gators pull the upset. Once again, thank you all for listening, and as always, go Gators.